Hi everybody, it's been a minute. As predicted, I kind of ran out of stuff to talk about, so I took a little bit of a break. We've also been setting up like the main channel. That's been going really well. We've been setting up podcasts, been working on a bunch of like individual things here and there, but I have some more stuff to cover, so I'm back for a few videos at least. Today there isn't a strong theme. It's mostly individual effects that you may have missed. I have unfortunately spelled out my own doom by pointing out all of the effects I'm doing, so now you're all looking for them, and they're much harder to hide. And yet, there are some that nobody noticed, so we're gonna go over a few today. Going back a few weeks on the Great British Bake Off, that one was fun. There were a lot of little tricks we pulled with that video, not even just VFX, but like we used our kitchen, which has a very distinct layout and is next to our living room, but we wanted both sides of the table they're using to look like the kitchen. This is just the same room from like opposite ends with some background details changed and then like matching the eye lines from everybody to make it look like it's one contained only kitchen room. And it's a good example of how like you don't need VFX all the time. Sometimes you can just be tricky in like what you're showing and what you're not. The greatest tool in all of filmmaking is the frame and what you choose to put in it. Sometimes more importantly, what you choose not to put in it. The biggest VFX trick on this is that Daniel Rustage was not actually present on the primary shooting day. He came to visit like 2 weeks before. We didn't really have the script done. We didn't even have lines written, but we wanted him in it. So basically just like stuck him in the places we wanted and had him rattle off a bunch of probably useful dialogue. And then I wrote the rest of the script with what he said in mind, knowing that that's all we had to work with. So some of the stuff we prepared for, like this shot with me and Rustage in the same shot, I knew I wanted to try and get a shot of us together. I recorded a reaction shot from him intending to set the same shot up later with myself, which is exactly what we did. The original shot with him is just him in front of a green screen in the same room. I actually ended up rotoscoping around him a lot, even though we had the green screen set up because the screen wasn't perfect. And I just got the same angle of me, and the counter is completely different, so I had to like fake the reflection. Being in the same lighting goes a long way, so the fact that we just got the shots with the same camera settings in the same direction at roughly the same time of day did most of the work. This interview shot is another example of the same thing. It was actually much easier, but the original shot of Daniel, I'm not in the background. We just went back outside to the same location and set like the microphone up over here as something for me to look at, and I did like the lean in, lean out motion. The crazy hidden last minute effect is actually the punchline shot. Daniel says one more thing at the end of the video, and then Thomas, as Paul Hollywood, silences him. And when we were filming it, when I wrote the script, I knew I had like something from him for this line. What I didn't remember correctly is that it was one of the outside shots and not one of the inside shots. I actually just cut him out using the Adobe After Effects Rotobrush tool, just a really effective automatic tool. And then I had Allison help me color match him to the inside background, which we got a blank background plate of. I think it pretty much slipped by unnoticed because nobody commented that it looked weird or anything. Blender sometimes comes in handy for very small things like the shadow photo in the Google Photo Collage video. This was supposed to be a very easy video. It ended up being more work than I expected. This was definitely one of the easier parts, was adding this like weird creepy shadow in behind me, which I actually cast onto the wall using Blender rather than just making it in Photoshop. I was just kind of curious to see like how much more believable it was if I like used actual light. So I just recreated a really basic setup, and this is the thing casting that shadow, which is honestly kind of creepier than the actual shadow that it makes. This is something Blender can do called a shadow catcher, where it only renders the shadow out. You can make geometry and then you can have just the area that's being blocked render out. It works for trying to blend 3D renders into actual footage, or in this case, just making the shadow by itself. The weird thing that I haven't quite figured out yet is that it ignores existing shadows. Like the shadow catcher is casting its own shadows on itself, and when you bring that into Photoshop, it doesn't like match up exactly. So that took a little bit of finagling. The rest of this video took a long time because screen replacements are still hard to do, and I always forget that. And I think it's probably not just me. This is probably a common thing like in film, because it feels like it should be easy. Like you just go like, oh yeah, we'll just put something else on the phone. My big issue here is that I somehow consistently forget this one important thing. So I'm gonna say it now again for myself and for you if you're ever interested in doing this kind of work. There's all these like phone apps that will let you put like a green screen or something on your phone. Don't do that. It's always more difficult than if the screen is just blank. Trackers are good enough now that they don't need these markers to track this. After Effects actually has something called Mocha that's built in, that's a planar tracker, and it basically just means you define like a plane, like a rectangular area. It can do an amazing job of just tracking that area. The other thing is that you lose reference reflections when you have something actually on the screen. So when the screen's lit up, any light that's hitting it and like reflecting and bouncing off isn't there. And when you have that, you can then layer it back on top of the footage that you're putting into the screen, and it looks much more realistic because it looks like there's glass over what you're putting on that. Even in professional movies and TV shows now, you can tell hack screen replacement jobs really easy because there isn't any detail on top of it. It's a perfectly pristine rectangle image just tracked onto the top. And again, tracking is easy, tracking is cheap. It's the other stuff that makes it kind of hard to do. I also ran into this issue where the screen itself was blue so that I could try to blue screen it away, but then it left this blue edge around the dark image that I created, and that was really hard to get rid of. So if you're ever doing screen replacements, don't put anything on your phone. Just leave it black. The only exception I can think of is if it's in the dark and like you need it to be casting light to look realistic. Getting a little bit more VFX heavy, the Civ video was entirely green screen this time. This was another worker video, which we've done a couple of, and they're usually shot outside, but we tried to shoot this one in June in Texas, and it is deadly to try and do that. We shot the entire thing on a green screen in a big open room in our house with open windows. Imitating sunlight indoors is pretty difficult to do. Usually I have to pick between the goal of like looking real or looking good. I haven't quite gotten good enough to make both quickly. If I take a long time on something, I can make it look real and good, but for like a weekly sketch, I really have to pick one or the other. In spite of that, I think this one actually turned out all right. Part of the reason is because I went out and got my own background footage. I went to a local park, used the exact same camera settings, which I wrote down on set previously, and got the backgrounds that like would be behind our shots had we actually filmed out there. We filmed it kind of at like sunset during like a magic hour, so the light was a little bit different, and I think it actually sells better than I would expect. Some shots more than others. The lighting in this one of Ethan turned out really good. The one of me is a little bit floaty, and then I had to just kind of give up on the wall shot because like it's not real. This isn't real. I just decided to lean into it for the punchline, in fact, and that's why Ethan just like lifts up the keyed element of me from the wall and then walks away with it. One thing I am proud of with these shots is actually blending them all together with this wall element that you can see in every single shot. Even though it's fake, it wasn't shot on location, a lot of it wasn't even shot in the same place, every single one of the shots has a little bit of this wall that we are sitting on. You can see it behind me even in this close-up. This was just a single photo scan that I bought for like $10 of some ruins. It's photoreal because it's a photo scan. I was able to just throw an HDRI in there, which lit it realistically. And it was actually just a really simple effects made out of things that other people created. Another good tip, and a thing that I've started doing and didn't do for most of my career because it just didn't occur to me, and because finding tutorials on Adobe products is impossible. If you're working with green screen, it is best to export that shit overnight into a file with a transparent background, because then you can bring it back into After Effects and everything actually renders at a workable speed. It makes it much easier to assemble your shot. Previously, I would apply the green screen effect and then put the background into the same file and do all of that in one composition, and every frame, if I tried to like play it back, would take like a minute to render out. So I had a lot of times where I would render out like an entire video, come back, see all these mistakes, have to go in, fix it, render it out again. And turns out if you just render out the problem part first, you fix most of that problem. So yeah, render out your green screen, please. Finally, we have the Rimworld video, which I think is my new favorite example of like really simple effects making a really basic idea work when it would have been like annoyingly difficult for how simple the video was before. Blender makes this incredibly easy because I can just create what I need. This is just digital set extension, which I've showed off before in much more complicated ways, like with the zombie video. Blender has opened up the opportunity to access all kinds of locations that previously would have taken us a long time to find and would have really delayed certain video concepts because we needed this one specific setup. It was always really annoying, especially when the video itself was so simple otherwise. This one just needed an empty room, and I only needed it for the establishing shot. I also needed the door with the hole in it to be attached to that room, and both of those things are hard to find independently of each other, much less together. What I'm able to do with Blender now, as long as I have one good wall, I don't have to do any green screen, and I don't have to do anything fancy other than just build the rest of the room around it. Kind of similar to in old movies, they would use something called matte paintings. The really famous one is Indiana Jones' warehouse shot, where the guy's pushing the cart into the warehouse with like the box on it, and the entire warehouse is just a painting, and they actually just superimposed the painting over the little sliver of footage of the guy walking. There's no green screen involved because the ground behind him was real. And that's exactly what I did with this. The original shot was actually me in this hallway, not even kind of a big empty room. I just needed the 90-degree angle of me in front of a blank wall, the door, the light casting onto that wall. This was actually a really cheap effect, and this is the way it just works in the final shot. When I knock on the door here and then jump back, it's just two different shots. I didn't even like blend between them. There's no fading or anything. I knew that I was going to do that, so I did like a really exaggerated like jerk back motion there because it's a lot easier to hide cuts on quick action. All I'm doing is plugging the same camera info into Blender, bringing in the original shot as reference, building out the rest of the room around the middle, the part that I actually want to keep. In After Effects, I have the complete pre-rendered room by itself, literally just cut out that little sliver from the original footage and stick it in place. And then there's lots of little like tweaking to do, but you do some rotoscoping, you do some color adjustment. I could go into more detail, and in the future I hope to actually like record some in progress footage of these things so I can show you what it looks like while I'm working on it. By the end of it, you're left with a fairly convincing, completely empty room. It's the first shot of the video. Nobody really noticed at all, even though there are some pretty obvious tells if you actually zoom in, like this doesn't match in any way. That's just one piece of footage fading into another. I think I accidentally just played into a really good shot composition. I did stay up the entire night on this one. I don't even know how. It wasn't even that complicated, but suddenly it was 6 a.m. and the video technically could exist without showing the space at the beginning. I think it's better to like visually establish the space first, but the important thing was just that he was talking to the door, and that was even easier. For that, we got footage of Thomas just standing in front of a window, because again, we can't go outside, so I just filmed him with outside in the background, knowing that I was only going to use like this little sliver around his eyes, and then using a photo of the door that I was actually standing in front of in that wide shot as just like a starting texture. I just rebuilt a really basic structure of the door as like a flat plane and then put a hole in it. I could have just left it at a hole, but details make the realism more convincing. And I was kind of inspired by the way that all of these like individual lights were shining away from the door. Originally, it was supposed to just be like one beam shining on me, and that's why in this close-up shot of me, you can see like the one light kind of cinematically coming in, which I'm also very proud of because it made a shot in front of a blank wall look more interesting. And the way that I set that up, as you saw in the wide earlier, is I just put this little dumb piece of cardboard in front of a light with a hole cut in it, but I messed up a couple of times. And so in the wide shot, there's like a bunch of rectangles of light coming out, and that didn't really make sense because there's only one hole. So the way I tried to explain that away is adding these bars into the door slots. And like, it doesn't really make sense for that shape to be creating that shape of light, but it's just enough to suggest it that I think your brain kind of goes like, yeah, okay. But then I spent another 6 hours creating an entirely empty room from scratch, which I made sound really easy, but I'm incredibly picky, so I went way too in detail. But I tricked you again. You didn't see it. Don't act like you did. I saw one of you joking about it, so maybe I'll give you credit, but nobody else. Anyway, that's the rundown on the most recent sketches. I hope to have another one of these up soon. I have at least one other like completely unrelated to the channel VFX video that I'm definitely going to put up. We have a video coming up that has so many effects that it's going to need at least 2 videos, one of which I've already recorded. I also have officially merged the Patreon for this channel back into the official Central Door Monster Patreon. So if you would like to support me and Door Monster and the people who work there, you can donate to patreon.com/doormonster, and if you donate on the $7 tier or above, same as the other one, you will get access to all the same files that were previously available, plus anything else that I put up from these videos moving forward. Thank you to everybody everybody who did support that Patreon. I really, really appreciate it. You guys are amazing. Thank you to everybody who is currently supporting the Door Monster Patreon, because you're keeping all of this running. And we really could not be more grateful to you. Anyway, thank you for watching. I will be back next week with more. And until then, have a good old time. Bye.